All right, surprise, surprise. We are going to be reading, starting today, the supplement to A Course in Miracles that is called Psychotherapy, Purpose, Process, and Practice. And I'm going to read you a little bit about the supplements. And this is taken from acim.org. Here's what it says. Supplements to A Course in Miracles. The two supplements, Psychotherapy, Purpose, Process, and Practice, and the Song of Prayer were scribed by Dr. Helen Schucman, as was A Course in Miracles, and are extensions of its principles. Psychotherapy, begun in 1973 and completed in 1975, offers a summary of the Course's principles of healing. Two people joined in sharing a common interest or goal. While ostensibly written for psychotherapists, all readers can benefit from its teachings. The Song of Prayer was scribed in 1977, and its 3 chapters summarize the Course's teachings on prayer, forgiveness, and healing. It first presents the ego's wrong-minded understanding of these terms, which is then contrasted with the Holy Spirit's right-minded view. These supplements presuppose a basic understanding of the Course's teachings and are helpful adjuncts to a student's study and practice of A Course in Miracles. So the interesting thing about the psychotherapy supplement, which is what we're going to be reading, is that Helen actually began scribing it and finished scribing it before A Course in Miracles was even published. A Course in Miracles was published in 1976, and she began scribing the supplement in 1973. It was finished in 1975. So that's interesting. Whereas the Song of Prayer came out the year after A Course in Miracles was published. Something to think about. Not too much, though. Here we go. Psychotherapy. This is the beginning. This is the introduction to the psychotherapy supplement. Psychotherapy is the only form of therapy there is. Since only the mind can be sick, only the mind can be healed. Only the mind is in need of healing. This does not appear to be the case, for the manifestations of this world seem real indeed. Psychotherapy is necessarily so that an individual can begin to question their reality. Sometimes he is able to start to open his mind without formal help, but even then it is always some change in his perception of interpersonal relationships that enables him to do so. Sometimes he needs a more structured, extended relationship with an, quote, official, unquote, therapist. Either way, the task is the same. The patient must be helped to change his mind about the, quote, reality, unquote, of illusions. All right, so let's just talk about that's a very short introduction to this. Psychotherapy is the only form of therapy there is. Why? Because since only the mind can be sick, only the mind can be healed. So it's only our minds that need healing. It's not our bodies, right? Nothing outside of ourselves. It is in our own psyche. Only the mind is in need of healing. This does not appear to be the case, for the manifestations of this world seem real indeed. Only the mind is in need of healing. What is that basically saying? It's saying that we tend to look outside of ourselves and see problems, and we see things outside of ourselves as the cause of our sickness. Things outside of ourselves are the cause of our suffering and our pain. And this is coming to just clearly say and to remind us that no, nothing external to the mind is in need of healing. Only the mind, right? Also not the body, only the mind. And this is saying that, but that does not, that flies in the face of what it seems to be. It seems to be that external agents are causing things that affect our minds. But this is reminding us, and remember this comes from Jesus, Helen's voice that was dictating this. She understood to be Jesus. So Jesus is saying, Well, it does seem like external agents are affecting our minds and causing sickness or whatever it may be. But in reality, everything starts in our mind. And that's what we need to address, nothing else. Psychotherapy is necessary so that an individual can begin to question their reality. Now, part of that reality is just that mistaken belief that there are things outside of ourselves that can make us happy or sad, sick or well. Jesus, once again, is saying, no, this is only in your mind. It has to do with what you are choosing in your mind. And ultimately, you will find that really there is only the mind, and you will return back to the mind of God, and the world will be no more, and that is your true reality. So this is the beginning the process of questioning your reality. Sometimes he is able to start to open his mind without formal help, but even then it is always some change in his perception of personal relationships that enables him to do so. So, what is this saying? Some people may be able to change, some people may be able to start to question the reality without a psychotherapist per se, without another person that is offering some kind of formal psychotherapeutic help. But even whether it's that or it's an informal relationship with another person, it comes to the same thing, basically. And so remember that salvation is a collaborative effort. So it takes two, right? It takes two to make the thing go right. It takes two to make it out of sight. I think that was Paula Abdul, I'm not sure. But anyway, sometimes he needs a more structured, extended relationship with a, quote, official therapist. Either way, the task is the same. The patient must be helped to change his mind about the, quote, reality, unquote, of illusions. Basically, that illusions are not real. And you need some kind of help from the audience, whether it's another person that you're in relationship with or whether it's a formal therapist, okay? So going on to the purpose of psychotherapy. And let's just see where we're going to end. I should have done that before. Yeah, we might just end today with just reading this one section and talking about it, okay? The purpose of psychotherapy. Very simply, the purpose of psychotherapy is to remove the blocks to truth. Its aim is to aid the patient in abandoning his fixed delusional system and to begin to reconsider the spurious cause and effect relationships on which it rests. No one in this world escapes fear, but everyone can reconsider its causes and learn to evaluate them correctly. God has given everyone a teacher whose wisdom and help far exceed whatever contributions an earthly therapist can provide. Yet there are times and situations in which an earthly patient-therapist relationship becomes the means through which he offers his greater gifts to both. What better purpose could any relationship have than to invite the Holy Spirit to enter into it and give it his own great gift of rejoicing? What higher goal could there be for anyone than to learn to call upon God and hear his answer? And what more transcendent aim can there be than to recall the way, the truth, and the life, and to remember God? To help in this is the proper purpose of psychotherapy. Could anything be holier? For psychotherapy, correctly understood, teaches forgiveness and helps the patient to recognize and accept it. And in his healing is the therapist forgiven with him. Everyone who needs help, regardless of the form of his distress, is attacking himself, and his peace of mind is suffering in consequence. These tendencies are often described as, quote, self-destructive, unquote, and the patient often regards them in that way himself. What he does not realize and needs to learn is that this, quote, self, unquote, which can attack and be attacked as well, is a concept he made up. Further, he cherishes it, defends it, and is sometimes even willing to, quote, sacrifice, unquote, his, quote, life, unquote, on its behalf. For he regards it as himself. This self he sees as being acted on, reacting to external forces as they demand, and helpless midst. Let me read that again. This self he sees as being acted on, reacting to external forces as they demand, and helpless midst the power of the world. Psychotherapy then must restore to his awareness the ability to make his own decisions. He must become willing to reverse his thinking and to understand that what he thought projected its effects on him were made by his projections on the world. The world he sees does therefore not exist. Until this is at least in part accepted, the patient cannot see himself as really capable of making decisions, and he will fight against his freedom because he thinks that it is slavery. The patient need not think of truth as God in order to make progress in salvation, but he must begin to separate truth from illusion, recognizing that they are not the same, and becoming increasingly willing to see illusions as false and to accept the truth as true. His teacher will take him on from there, as far as he is ready to go. Psychotherapy can only save him time. The Holy Spirit uses time as he thinks best, and he is never wrong. Psychotherapy under his direction is one of the means he uses to save time and to prepare additional teachers for his work. There is no end to the help that he begins and he directs. By whatever routes he chooses, all psychotherapy leads to God in the end. But that is up to him. We are all his psychotherapists, for he would have us all be healed in him. Powerful, right? Even if you don't fully understand it, it speaks with great authority. Now, let's step back a moment and let's talk about the father, the quote-unquote father of psychoanalysis, who you may or may not know is Sigmund Freud. Just like Michael Jackson was the king of pop, right? Sigmund Freud was, or James Brown was the father of soul or whatever. Sigmund Freud was the great granddaddy of psychoanalysis. Now, a lot of A Course in Miracles owes a debt of gratitude to Freud, in a sense, because ultimately A Course in Miracles goes beyond Freud. But Freud's concepts play a big role in the form of A Course in Miracles, and we see Freudian language throughout A Course in Miracles, such as the words dissociation. We see a lot. We see the idea of the dream of convenience. We see obviously the term ego. Bunch of things, right, that we can point to. One thing I learned recently is that Helen, who was the author, the scribe, not the author, she was the scribe of A Course in Miracles. She was definitely knew a lot about Freud, as did her co-scribe Bill, and as did Ken Wapnick, who helped with the editing. They all knew Freud. Helen was not very much into Jung, Carl Jung, who was a Swiss psychoanalyst who broke with Freud. He was a student of Freud back in the early days, the early 20th century, and then he broke with Freud. And I think most of Freud's inner circle actually broke with him eventually, and they created their own systems. They eventually, went their own way. But I don't think you can, it's kind of like Freud was the one that started it all in a sense, right? So let's just put that on the table for a second. We may come back to that. I personally like Carl Jung a lot. I don't know what issue Helen had with Jung. You don't know, but back in the day, I really got into learning about Freud and Jung, or studying Freud and Jung. And I ended up liking Jung more than Freud because Jung seemed more open to the spiritual dimension and the mystical dimension than Freud was. Freud seemed to be very much a materialist scientist. But again, the Course goes beyond Freud. So let's read each paragraph and we'll talk about it, and then we'll call it a day. Very simply, the purpose of psychotherapy is to remove the blocks to truth. Its aim is to aid the patient in abandoning his fixed delusional system and to begin to reconsider the spurious cause and effect relationships on which it rests. No one in this world escapes fear, but everyone can reconsider its causes and learn to evaluate them correctly. God has given everyone a teacher whose wisdom and help far exceed whatever contributions an earthly therapist can provide. Yet there are times and situations in which an earthly patient-therapist relationship becomes the means through which he offers his greater gifts to both. So God has given everyone a teacher. Who is that teacher? That teacher is the Holy Spirit. Okay, so the Holy Spirit is what Jesus talks about as the voice for God, that speaks for God. God is not in the picture. God, as soon as the separation apparently began, in that very moment, God, this is all symbolic, but the Course says, Jesus says, that God sent the Holy Spirit into the dream, into the illusion, to help bring the sons of God back to God once again. So the Holy Spirit is that mediating aspect of God, the voice for God in our heart, you could say, who reminds us of the love of God and brings us back. And so when Jesus talks about the teacher, God has given everyone a teacher whose wisdom and help far exceed whatever contributions an earthly therapist can provide. He's talking about the Holy Spirit. And then he says, yet there are times and situations in which an earthly patient-therapist relationship becomes the means through which he offers his greater gifts to both, meaning through the patient-therapist relationship, the Holy Spirit can also work. So, basically Jesus is putting his blessing on using the Course in a formal therapeutic, psychotherapeutic setting, let's say. Okay, so you can use the Course in a formal psychotherapeutic setting, and the Holy Spirit will show up, right? When two or more are gathered in my name, whether it's formal or informal, that can also be a way toward the greater healing. So the purpose of psychotherapy is to remove the blocks to truth, and that's what A Course in Miracles says from the very beginning. This Course, Jesus says, I cannot tell you what God is, but I can help you to remove the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. Love and God basically are synonymous. You could say the love of God, but for all intents and purposes, love is God. God is love and love is God. And these are just terms, these are just concepts. It's helpful to think of God, it's helpful to think of God because it's helpful to think of a loving father, right? And and it's helpful to think of love because sometimes we forget that our Father is loving. So to speak of the love of God, we can say that God is only love, right? And so the love of God is all that God really is the love of God. Nothing else. Ultimately, its aim is to aid the patient in abandoning his fixed delusional system. So we're all in the madhouse here. We're all delusional. And we're all stuck in the delusion until we start to extract ourselves through some methodology or some path. And to begin to reconsider the spurious, which means the false cause and effect relationships on which it rests. Okay, so our delusional system is based on false premises, basically. And because it's based on false premises, it will not stand, and that is the cause of our pain and our suffering and our guilt and all the other things. No one in this world escapes fear, but everyone can reconsider its causes and learn to evaluate them correctly. So if you understand the cause of fear and you understand that it's ultimately not real, then you can get beyond it. But if you think the fear is real, then it's very difficult to do so. And that's where a therapist could be helpful. Okay, so that's the first paragraph. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. What better purpose could any relationship have than to invite the Holy Spirit to enter into it and give it his own great gift of rejoicing? So now Jesus actually does mention the Holy Spirit by name. He didn't mention in the first paragraph, but now he says, you invite the Holy Spirit into this formal therapeutic relationship, and you invite the Holy Spirit to bring the joy, right? To show us the joy. And both the therapist and the patient are in the same position. They both need healing, and the Holy Spirit is going to help to bring them both the healing that they need. What higher goal could there be for anyone than to learn to call upon God and hear his answer? So the Holy Spirit is the answer, right? You call upon God and the Holy Spirit is the answer. And what more transcendent aim can there be than to recall the way, the truth, and the life, and to remember God? Now, it's basically saying the same thing. Now, from the Gospel of John, we know that Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. But also keep in mind that for the Course, Jesus is a manifestation of the Holy Spirit. We are all manifestations of the Holy Spirit. We just have forgotten. And we are all Jesus. We just have forgotten. So what we're doing is we're calling on the way, the truth, and the life, which is the Holy Spirit, but which is also Jesus, in this therapeutic relationship. To help in this is the proper purpose of psychotherapy. Could anything be holier? Rhetorical question. No. Nothing could be holier. For psychotherapy, correctly understood, teaches forgiveness and helps the patient to recognize and accept it. And in his healing is the therapist forgiven with him. So the therapist is in a position where they know A Course in Miracles, and so they can help lead the patient to this understanding. But in reality, the therapist also needs healing, like I said. And so in offering this to the patient, the therapist is also healed themselves. Because as the patient is healed, the therapist is healed as well. Paragraph 3. Everyone who needs help, regardless of the form of his distress, is attacking himself, and his peace of mind is suffering in consequence. These tendencies are often described as, quote, self-destructive, and the patient often regards them in that way himself. What he does not realize and needs to learn is that this self, which can attack and be attacked as well, is a concept he made up. Further, he cherishes it, defends it, and is sometimes even willing to, quote, sacrifice, unquote, his quote, life, unquote, on its behalf. For he regards it as himself. This self he sees as being acted on, reacting to external forces as they demand, and helpless amidst the power of the world. Everyone who needs help is attacking himself. Our true self is beyond attack. Our true self needs no defense. Our true self does not attack and cannot be attacked, cannot be harmed in any way. But our false self, which we cling to and which we mistakenly identify as our true self, that can be attacked, and that is the source of our misery. That is the source of our delusion and our everything that goes along with that. What we think of as self-destructive behavior, that, our self cannot be destroyed, our true self. Self-destructive behavior would only be destroying our false self, which in some sense maybe is a good thing, Except we don't want to destroy our false self. That's not the Course's way. It's more that we're gradually dissolving the false self over time. We don't need to kill our ego. We don't need to destroy our ego. We just need to understand what the ego is. And in understanding what the ego is, the ego thought system, the ego and its whole thought system will be dissolved, will be dispelled. And we will not be living from our ego, which is our false self. We'll be living more and more from our true self, which is spirit, which you could say is the Holy Spirit. And remember, once again, we are manifestations of the Holy Spirit when we are in our true self.